I can't see the participant list. Oh, I know. Attendees. I gotta look up at attendees.
Yep, it is starting to fill up here. Welcome.
So, all right, thank you for joining us. We'll get started in a few minutes. We're waiting for our participants to join us. Some people are still eating their sandwiches, so you might be a little late. All right, assuming everybody's getting lunch. All right, we're about to start. Just wanting to let everybody know that we are going to start in just a couple minutes.
Ready to go.
Okay, all right. All right, hi, I'm Kathy Doty with the Hennepin-University Partnership, and I'm joined today with Sarah Sandgren, also from the partnership. And we want to welcome you to the HUP Summer Webinar Series. We're still calling it summer, even though it's officially fall. But thanks for joining us virtually today. And a few Zoom reminders. Your video and audio are not enabled, so just so you know. So use the chat function. If you need any help from us while you're, with regard to the technology, just go ahead and send us a message in the chat function. And if you'd like to ask a question from our speaker, you can submit that through the Q&A, which you'll find a button. Oopsie, just a second here. You'll find a button at the bottom, along the bottom of the Zoom window. And we will monitor questions throughout, and our speaker is going to address the questions at the end of her presentation. And we want to also let you know that the webinar will be recorded. So, and also look for an email tomorrow with a survey and a link to the recorded webinar video. We'll also be sending out announcements about later fall 2020 webinars very soon. So I want to welcome today our presenter, Dr. Abigail Gewirtz, and she's coming to us from England. So we're going to do our best with technology, but she's a long ways away. So anyway, she is the Lindahl Leadership Faculty Chair in the Department of Family Social Science and the Institute of Child Development in the College of Education and Human Development. And she's also a part of the Institute for Translational Research in Children's Mental Health at the University of Minnesota. And her primary interests are in trauma, resilience, and promoting children's healthy development with two distinct but interrelated foci. The impact of exposure to highly stressful and traumatic events on parenting and child functioning, and the development, implementation, and evaluation of evidence-based, family-focused interventions in community settings. And in May 2020, she published a book, and the book is called When the World Feels Like a Scary Place, Essential Conversations for Anxious Parents and Worried Kids. So thank you very much, Professor Gewirtz, for joining us today and to share more about this extremely important and timely topic.
Thank you, Kathy, for the kind introduction. And it's a treat to be with you today. Yeah, I don't know about all of you, but the world today feels to me somewhat like a scary place. So, if it wasn't, a lot of people ask me, did you write the book when coronavirus happened? And no, I did not. I actually started writing the book back in 2016, or I got the idea for the book back in 2016. And if you'll recall, 2016 was 4 years ago. It was also an election year. And it was a year in which people were really worrying about how they were going to sit around the Thanksgiving table or July 4th barbecues with such diverging and often acrimonious political debates and discussions and disagreements. It was also a year when we really started being much more aware of the need for lockdown drills, or the, I won't say the need, but the use of lockdown drills in school for highly publicized, horrendous school shootings. It was the year when people began to start talking about climate change as an existential challenge. And you may or may not know that 2015, so 2016, was coming off the year in which there was more movement of people around the world, more migration than at any time since World War II. So that was really it felt like a difficult year, 2016. And so here's my caveat. here's my mea culpa. At the end of the book, I write about why I decided to write the book. So I just told you. And then I wrote that in 2017, at the beginning of 2017, Twitter had a competition. Describe 2016 in 3 words. And I quote one Twitter user who wrote, worst period year, period ever. And I actually wrote that in the book. Big mistake. Who would have known, fast forward 4 years, that 2020 would see a pandemic, the likes of which we have not seen for 100 years. Attention to, finally, to racial injustice that brought so many people onto the streets, in particular following the horrendous murder in our own town of Minneapolis of George Floyd. And so many, so many issues happening this year, an economic crisis, people working from home with kids to manage, older adults or vulnerable people they're very concerned about, the horrendous toll in human lives that the pandemic has taken. And truly, unfortunately, I think to many, the world does feel like a scary place. So what I'm going to spend the next while sort of talking with you about, and I really hope this is going to be an interactive. So I plan to talk for not more than about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes max. No, half an hour. I'm going to talk for no more than half an hour, and then we'll do Q&A. So please, I do encourage you, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box. And I'd also love for you to sort of weigh in on how you're feeling these days. And so, yep, you did right, Sarah. That was perfect. If you can fast forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we navigate when the world feels like a scary place. We are, most of us, our kids are all back at school now. But what does back at school mean? Of course, it means maybe hybrid school, maybe online school only, maybe in-person school with, you can see here, everyone wearing masks and desks spaced out. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with the stress that's with us right now, with a focus on the beginning of the school year. How bad news affects us, really. Parents and kids, and the parent-child dance when it comes to bad news and how it affects us. We'll talk a little bit about kids and emotions, conversations and emotions, and take 10. And as you can imagine, since I only plan to talk for 30 minutes, I'm going to do like a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully we'll have a chance to sort of to converse and address topics of high interest afterwards. So now I want to just, I want to ask you a question. So what we know, you've seen this picture, although probably most of you have not seen it for about the last 6 months. It's the picture all of us see on the airplane when we're told to put our own mask on before assisting others. And I really like that. That sort of idea when we're thinking about parents and kids, or anybody who cares for kids and children, because what stresses us stresses the children that we love who are under our roof. So I'd like you to think for just a few seconds what bothers you. And all of us have things that particularly hit our nerves, right? And so I want you not only to think about what bothers you, but where do you feel it in your body, right? What happens in your body when you feel stress? And so if you feel like it, you can type it into the chat box, and I might ask Sarah or Kathy to just sort of tell me what's being written. But mostly I want you to think about what bothers you and where do you feel it in your body. And the reason I want you to think about where you feel it in your body is because understanding what stress does to us and where we feel emotions, our response to stress, it helps us to think about, to both label it and also to think about how it then affects our thinking and our behavior. So I see someone already wrote, in my neck and shoulders, abdominal pain, chest, heart, throat. Oh, this is great. So we feel stress everywhere, right? And some of us, like I know that you're one of my kids, she gets a headache routinely. That's her thing. And my husband gets sometimes optic migraines when he's feeling stressed. I get sort of tightness over here, or sometimes some people, they feel it in their stomach, or they get sweaty hands, or all kinds of things. So that's fantastic. And then my next question is, okay, how do you respond to bad news, right? So if you think about a particular incident, and it could be something, and mostly what I'm going to focus on are things that occur outside the home. So I call it like when the world feels like a scary place. But for now, it can be anything. Like, what is your typical response to bad news, right? Oh my goodness, Nicole is doing full distance learning for 2 kids. So I can't even imagine. Okay, that sounds like pretty stressful. So think about, how you respond when you get really stressed. Okay. And 3, so we're going to have some really great strategies. Kathy, thank you. Talking to family and friends. So some people talk. I'm going to guess that other people, nice, focus on a project. I'm going to guess, stiff upper lip. We have a stiff upper lip person. I'm going to guess that some people take a walk, or they go do their favorite yoga class or something like that. So we all have strategies that we use as a way to respond to bad news. And then in terms of the styles that we have, some of us are the keep calm and carry on stiff upper lip type. And when taken to the extreme, we tend, that can be kind of hard. Like if you think about the stiff upper lip, what it literally means is you want to cry, but you really make yourself not. And it's what in the lingo we'd call emotional suppression, right? Push those emotions away. Don't let them get to you. But if your lip is wobbly, they are. The opposite is to let it all hang out, right? Go yell, scream, the primal scream, punch the punching bag. And that's really the opposite. So you have these 2 opposite extremes. One is don't show anything, suppress it, and the other one is let it all hang out. And the reality is that most of us are in the middle. But I think the most important message I want to sort of convey from this slide is that we have 2 choices when we're hit with strong emotions, stressful events, things that kind of bowl us over. We hear something and we think, oh, or our child races into the house and crying, and we're sort of, taken aback. The first thing is we can be really blown away by our emotions. And when that happens, we can easily react impulsively. What are you talking about? Or I told you, or I can't believe it. The world must be coming to an end, and all sorts of things. And that really is when our emotions take us away. And the other sort of approach is what I call responding intentionally, which is, some people call it staying calm or recovering. But essentially what responding intentionally requires is to put a tiny space between when you're hit by the emotion or the wave of stress and when you react, when you respond, when you do something about it, or when you think something about it. And taking that tiny little space, whether it's in the form of a deep breath or a very short walk, or picking up the phone to call a family member or a friend, that allows you to respond intentionally. And that is what I would call putting on your own mask first before assisting others. So I'd like you to think about, and you don't need to write this in the chat, how you stay calm or recover when bad news hits. And some people already put that down, but that's just a little thing to sort of to think about. And Sarah, we can move on. So I also want to, and I just want to say, I address these much more in the book, all of these things. But I also want to say that this is not just about us dealing with our own stress and then turning to our kids. Of course, when we have children in our lives, we have a dance that both of us dance. And so both both we parents and our children, or we grandparents and our grandchildren, or we concerned others and the kids who we love and love us, both bring a unique contribution to the relationship. And I love to think about it as a dance, because when you have a dance, you know that you have to learn the steps, but you also have to learn the pace of the dance, right? To make sure that you don't step on each other's toes. And so with a child, it could be that you're an extrovert and your child is a quiet, sort of slow to warm up child, or you're not a great dancer, but your child loves to dance. And so those are the kinds of things that you need to think about. And I'm going to particularly frame it in the context of anxiety. And so we all know that we're born with different gifts. And I like to think about anxiety as a gift, because anxiety is really important. And we know that people who don't have sufficient anxiety also get into trouble, right? Fear is evolutionarily crucial, right, for survival. But we also know that having too much anxiety can be stressful, because what happens is we might think that there's a lion in front of us, but there isn't really a lion in front of us. And sometimes I describe it, I have a tiny practice, and sometimes I describe it to my patients as, you know, your body is playing tricks on you. It's pretending that there's a lion in front of you, but there actually isn't. And so the things that you need to think about with your child is like, does anyone in your family have an extra gift of anxiety? And often if parents do, then kids do as well. And by the way, there is a developmental trajectory of anxiety as well. We know, for example, that anxiety normatively peaks at around the age of 9 or 10, which makes a lot of sense, because I think 9 or 10 is a scary age. You know, you're old enough to realize that there's a really big world out there, but you're young enough still not to be able to do much about it. So think about how anxiety changes over development. And then the last thing I'll just say from this slide is, think about your child's temperament. And I don't really have time to talk about orchids, dandelions, and tulips, but we can talk about it later if anyone's interested. But kids have different temperaments, and those interact with stress to produce responses. And so we want to think about the kind of child we have, as well as what bothers us and how we deal with it. Sarah. So, okay, this is not an exhaustive list of the worries that you may have had going back to school. And so I would welcome anybody who wants to put into the chat box the kinds of things that they're dealing with, so other people can look. But basically, so many issues. Going back to school is just a difficult time of the year anyway, because there's all sorts of anticipatory worry, new classrooms, new schools, new teachers, without having to worry about masks and infection and socially distancing and washing your hands, using hand sanitizer, things like that. It's really tough. It's tough for kids of all ages. It's tough for the very young ones who don't completely understand. It's tough for the teenagers who truly all they want to do is be out of the house, and they're stuck often. And after school activities, I have a 17-year-old, my youngest is 17. She happens to be on tennis team, and they have been told that tennis is on, but if one child in any of the teams gets sick and tests positive for COVID, the entire school sports is shut down. So the stakes are pretty high, and it's complicated, and it's hard, and it's incredibly, incredibly stressful. And I haven't even talked about the parents, like Nicole mentioned, who are trying to juggle kids at home, who are learning online, and then they also have to work full-time jobs. It's very, very tricky. So we have a lot to worry about, and the world can feel scary. Sarah, you want to move us on? So let's think a little bit about how kids learn about emotions, because this is really important when we think about what I'm going to talk about in just a couple of minutes, which is the idea of something called essential conversations to help kids feel that the world is not such a scary place, even if we ourselves, we adults, are feeling it. Kids learn about emotions in 3 ways. They watch us, their parents, or the adults around them, dealing with our own big emotions. When we come home and we kick the door or we yell, they observe us dealing with our own big emotions. Or when we say, I'm really angry and I just need a few minutes, that's a lesson for them. They also learn by seeing how we respond to their big emotions. When a child cries and a parent says, oh, don't cry, you have nothing to cry about, or stop crying, you're just trying to get my attention, or honey, I see you're crying. to me, that tells me that you're feeling sad. Are you feeling sad or worried? All those responses teach powerful lessons to kids. And then finally, kids learn about emotions through active discussion, so when we sit down and talk about emotions, which most of us don't spend a lot of time doing, kids learn about emotions. And we know that the way kids socialize their children's emotions, respond to them, show emotions, discuss them, affects children's later likelihood of anxiety and depression. And specifically, when parents invalidate or dismiss or even punish kids' emotions, like when you say, don't worry, you have nothing to worry about, or how dare you come home crying because you felt bullied, you beat that kid up, otherwise I'm going to beat you up, which, I kid you not, is a real, absolute real quotation from someone I came across a number of years ago. Those kinds of things those kinds of responses tell children emotions are dangerous, they're to be punished, or at the most benign, they're not important, don't worry, and we often want to say that, and we say that because we don't want our kids to worry, we don't want them to have a burden of worries. But dismissing it can cause kids to sort of learn that it's just not important. The good news is that a wonderful, amazing psychologist by the name of John Gottman developed this approach called emotion coaching, and the research on emotion coaching has shown that actually, if parents are careful at cultivating and watering and shining light on their children's emotions, that kids do well, and they learn that emotions are to be nurtured and valued. You can go on to the next slide, Sarah. And so emotion coaching consists of 5 key steps. And I really do apologize if I'm like zooming through this. But again, this, the book covers this in much, much more detail. But emotion coaching is a way to help our children deal with emotions. And I really, what really drove me to write the book was that the idea that there were so many of these sort of big classes of world events, from severe weather disasters and climate change to violence to relentless exposure to technology and things like social media bullying, to such a divided society that we're living in, to social justice issues, that the emotion coaching driven conversations can really help our kids navigate and deal with these stressful events. And I'll give you a few examples. So emotion coaching, and so I'll give you an example right now. And let's take a classic coronavirus school example. Your child is in hybrid school situation where they go to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then they do online school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they come home on Thursday afternoon and they tell you that their best friend Maddie's mom has the virus. And and maybe your daughter's crying because Maddie's so sad, and maybe her mom's really sick, or maybe she has a pre-existing vulnerability, or maybe she's a nurse, or lots and lots of reasons. And your first thought might be, oh no, what about our grandma? And oh my goodness, when did she last talk to Maddie? And did she hug Maddie? And does that mean she's going to make me sick and I'm going to make grandma sick? Or when did she last see grandma? And all these things are going through your head. And that's where it's time to put on your own mask before assisting others. And so in this case, it might take the form of wow, Maddie, that's a lot. Honey, come in, take your backpack off, sit down, let me go grab you a cup of water. And in that short amount of 20 seconds, you have an opportunity to take 10 deep breaths, ground yourself, get yourself and your daughter a glass of water and sit down. And maybe your mask isn't on all the way, but it's on enough to be able to turn to her, which is what you really want to do. And what you're going to do, rather than jumping into what's going on, is to just take a moment to turn to her and look at her and say, Maddie, I see you're crying, and I see you're looking down, and I see your brow is furrowed, and that tells me that you're sad or worried, or is that right? Do I have that right? How are you feeling? And she might say, I don't know, Mom. And you could say, well, where do you feel it in your body? Does your tummy hurt? Or are you like, sometimes I know when I get stressed, I get a headache. Or what about you? And what you're doing is you're helping her to identify what she's feeling and to label it and to associate it with feelings in her body that allow her later on to sort of have a memory of what this emotion does. Basically, for her to start identifying emotions that produce thoughts that she might have and will tell you about, and eventually actions. And she might say, like, yeah, I'm feeling really scared because Maddie's mom is sick, and I don't know if I don't know if Maddie's going to get sick, and I don't know if I'm going to get sick. And this is your opportunity to validate. So you might say, wow, no wonder you're feeling sad and worried. If it was me and my best friend was sick, or my best friend's mom was sick, I would feel sad and worried too. And I remember when I was a little girl and there was an outbreak of measles or German measles or mumps or whatever it is. And my friend got sick and I was really worried about her because she was not well. And then I thought I was going to get sick. And then I thought grandma was going to get sick. So what you're doing is you're saying to your child, not only do you have this emotion, but your emotion is valid. It's to be honored and respected. And then it's your opportunity to really listen to what your child is saying. And often we assume that our kids, we assume that we know what our kids are worried about. Maybe it's what they first say. I'm worried that Maddie's going to get sick. But when you really listen to them, sometimes the things that you hear are really quite different from what you thought she was worried about. So I can't tell you how many times I've heard parents say, I thought she was worried about getting the virus, but I realized as soon as I sat down and listened to her that she was terrified that I was going to get sick and that I was going to die or grandma was going to die. And so it's in these kinds of listening conversations that you have the opportunity not only to hear really what's worrying your child, but also to make sure that you can continue to regulate your own emotions while you're hearing some pretty disturbing stuff from your child, maybe. And so if the conversation ended there, okay, well, it wouldn't be okay, but because we want to listen to our children's worries. But in this kind of an environment that we're living in this kind of scary world, what I feel is really, really important is to help children find both emotional and concrete solutions to the problems that they bring. Because one of the things that's so scary about this pandemic or the issues of racial justice that have arisen or climate change or whatever it is that we can feel so helpless. And if we adults feel helpless, how are kids who truly do have so little control over their environment, how do we think they feel? And so the goal here is to help kids feel first less anxious, so find emotional strategies to cope. And those could include things like deep breathing or ways to calm if you're feeling worried, like a stress ball or a walk, or providing your child with the tools that you have already probably developed to deal with the stress of what they're bringing you. But also to find ways for your child to deal with a concrete issue. I'm scared of losing grandma and I want to tell her I love her, but I can't come and visit her. So for example, it's true, we can't visit grandma, and you can't tell your child that grandma's going to be okay or she's not going to get sick, because no one can promise that, but you can promise your child that you're doing everything you can to look after grandma. And by the way, this is why we only see her through the window, or we wash our hands so much, or whatever it is. And let's brainstorm some ways that we can show grandma we love her. And the reason I think it's so important to help children problem solve, and there's a whole sort of chapter in the book about this, how you do it, is that it's a very empowering process. And so this is a process where both you and your child will generate some solutions and ideas, and you'll sift through them, and you'll discard some, and you'll take others, and you'll combine others for compromises. And sometimes you'll need to set limits as well. But by getting ideas from your child and by teaching her that, she can be empowered to be a part of the solution, you're teaching her that even when the world feels scary, there are things you can do. And I think that's so important in these in these circumstances, in the situations that we are in, because one of the things I really worry about is, in a world that feels scary, it's a natural inclination for us to retreat into our homes. And literally, many of us are in our homes and have been in our homes for 6 months. And I'm really concerned that people who get very anxious can sort of remain in the bubble of the home and then be scared to go out, even when we have a vaccine. And so I think it's really important for parents to be able to provide strategies for their kids to help them feel engaged and a little bit more empowered. Okay, Sarah, we can move forward. So if you're going to have, for example, a conversation, this emotion coaching process and what I laid out on the prior slide are really what I call these essential conversations. So if you're going to have an essential conversation, or when you're going to have a conversation, or I should say, as I wrote on the slide, conversations really, I think, are your best defense in this difficult world. But if you're going to, for example, have a conversation, there are some things to just think about, right? Some of your conversations are going to be on the spot, right? You won't have time to prepare, but some you will. Like if things are changing at school, you may know before your child, especially if your child's younger, and you might be able to think things through. And some of the things that you want to know, like you want to think about, is how much does your child know? What does your child think about the issue? What's your child worried about? And what worries you? That's really important, so you can be really aware of it. I think it's really important for us to just acknowledge here that we're in this rapidly changing, uncertain world where it's so easy to feel helpless, that there's so much hearsay about the virus and about everything that's going on, that there's so much that is not fact, right? And it's so easy to be misled on social media, for example, and a shockingly large number of people get their news from there. And so it's going to be really important to sift facts from hearsay and to teach children that as well. And then, unfortunately, there are so many disparities regarding who is affected by the virus, how they're affected, and they are along familiar lines, and this seeps into school as well. So we know that kids who are less ready to go back to school, we know that and I think it's going to take a little while for us to see these disparities, but I know that teachers are already seeing huge differences in kids coming back in September after half a year, essentially, of very little school as we know it. So Sarah, you can go on to the next slide. So like I said, these conversations can be planned or spontaneous. If they're spontaneous, just give yourself a breather, just take a deep breath, and it's fine to just say, oh, you know what, I need a glass of water, and give yourself the 5 seconds it takes to fill up a glass and, go over to the sink, fill up a glass and come back. If it isn't planned, think about where and when you want to have it, like not at stressful times, maybe once dinner's been cleared, but well before bed. Make sure you all put your phones away so that all of you can listen with all your ears. What will you share? Who will lead? I know that sometimes, for all of us, if there may be something that really triggers you, but your partner's good to take the lead, or things like that. And then don't forget the rules around a brainstorming with your child when you're thinking about solutions, that all ideas are good ideas, and that if you make a plan, when you make a plan, that's very important to double back on the plan and to make sure that you're monitoring it, so it's not just something that you sort of throw out and then forget about. Okay, so I think we're coming up on the last slide, Sarah. So in the book, I write about how I did a little bit of research, because I was really interested in understanding how much time parents and children spend talking every day. And so I went to the National Time Use Survey, which is a survey put out by the, I can't remember what the bureau is, it's in the book. But it's a federal agency that conducts a survey on a representative sample of the population every year. And the survey asks you to complete, for those people with children under 18 living with them, it asks parents to fill out how they spend their day. So you have 24 hours, and there are things like sleep, eat, work, and then there's a whole section relating to children. So dressing children, driving children places, feeding children, talking with, listening to and talking with children. And I was really curious to find out how many minutes parents reported listening to and talking with children as a primary activity. And I was shocked to find out that on average, across the population of parents, the average, and I wish I could see you all, we could be in a live audience, because then I could have hands up, like guess, take a guess. On average, the number of minutes parents report spending primarily time listening to and talking with their children is 3 minutes a day, 3 minutes in a 24-hour period. That's on average across the whole sample population. The reality is that 80% of the people actually put 0 minutes in for primarily listening to and talking with children. And it may be because they consider it a secondary activity. You know, you talk to kids in the car or over dinner or things like that. But it was still pretty shocking to me that, you know, that this as a primary activity, 80% of respondents put 0. And the other 20%, to their credit, put in a good amount of time, like more than a half an hour, on average, 3 minutes a day. And so my sort of, my message and my request to you to think about is, and I'm sure that the reason, you know, that you're all here, so you're all doing this already, but so my message, my ending message is to take 10, right? Take 10 minutes a day, no phones, no other distractions, just to listen to and talk with your child. And it does not have to be face-to-face, awkward, what's going on, what are you feeling today conversation. It can be over dinner. It can be driving in a car where you're sitting side by side, especially with teenagers, it's much less awkward. It can be walking the dog. I think walks are fantastic things. Don't have to be forced, follow your child's lead. If she doesn't want to talk, model conversations between you and your partner over dinner, for example. But just take 10 minutes distraction-free to talk every day. Sarah, you can go on to the next slide. So that's it. I promised I would finish with 20 minutes for discussion, and I have. So this is the book, When the World Feels Like a Scary Place. And essentially the first half of the book really focuses on the skills that I've been talking about today. And the second half of the book has 5 chapters, each focused on a class of scary world events, climate, weather events, scary weather events and climate change, social justice issues like poverty and racial injustice. And I was incredibly grateful to 2 colleagues, Dr. Bravada Garrett Akinsanya, who is local and some of you may know, to help me with some really lovely small conversations on white privilege and bias and things like that. And Dr. Ruben Parra Cardona, who is an expert on immigration and who helped me with some conversations on immigration and in the Our Divided Society section. So social justice, climate and weather, violence, including like school lockdown drills and things like that, social justice and relentless exposure to media, including things like social media bullying. So that's a lot. I'm sorry, I spoke probably really fast. On the website that was in the last slide, abigailgewirtz.com, which Sarah, maybe you can choose, maybe you can paste into the chat. If you go on the website, there are 2 conversations that are just freely available. One is about the coronavirus. So one's a conversation that I actually wrote early on in the coronavirus about between a parent and a child, explaining the virus using emotion coaching strategies. And in the blog section, there is a conversation about racial injustice. It's a conversation between a Black 12-year-old boy and his parents sadly, about the shooting of an unarmed young Black man in a different town, and sort of about the talk. So you'll find those 2 conversations there. And I think we should open up the floor for Q&A and discussion.
Great. Yes, I'll be sure to share links to those things in the follow-up email that all of our participants will receive tomorrow as well. So we have a question. And the person says, so I read about dealing with kids' emotions in a book and started to use this method with my kid. However, I noticed that my kid started to use crying and showing emotions sometimes fake emotions as a mechanism to get what he wants. What do? I want to continue to acknowledge our emotions, but I don't want them to use it against me.
Such a great question. I love that you asked that question. Often I get that question, and when I don't, I'll finish the presentation and say, oh, I forgot to address that. So thank you so much for bringing it up. Yeah, because what we say in the work that we do, in the research work that we do, and I'm going to attribute this to my academic mentor, Marian Forgach, shine the light on what you want to grow. And so if we shine the light, you know, it's the classic example of that is, a journalist interviewed me a few months ago on shushing kids. So he said, like, is it okay to shush kids? And I explained, you know, shine the light. Like, the more shushing you do, the more attention you're giving your child, and your child would rather have any attention than no attention, even if it's negative attention. And the same thing can happen with emotions, because if you know, when you provide attention primarily when your child is showing a big emotion like crying, then what does your child is like, oh, this is the best way to get my mom's attention or my dad's attention. And so it's a tricky issue, because you don't want to dismiss the emotions, but it's also going to be really hard in reality to have a conversation with a child when the child is expressing big emotions. So the first thing to do is to respond, to acknowledge the child's emotions, to validate the child's emotions. But what I would say is, what you don't want to move on to is the listening and the problem solving. Because when a child's crying and really upset, and then you can get into this sort of, oh my goodness, never ending and worse, and parents that often are worried about that. So one thing that you could say is, oh, you know, your child comes in crying, she's worried about her friend whose mom is sick, and oh honey, you know, I would be worried too if I were you, and I would be so sad, and no wonder you feel sad, and goodness, okay, and so you know what, I'm going to prepare you a snack, okay, or I know you want to put your stuff down in your bedroom, why don't you have a little lie down, and when you feel a little bit better, let's sit down and talk about it, right? So you are not giving your child the attention for the big emotions. You're validating them, you're labeling them, you're identifying, you're validating them, and you're saying, okay, when things have calmed down a little bit, we're going to have that discussion. And it should be the discussion that's really the reinforcing thing. So when your child is coming up with ideas and things like that, that's like when they get the real good attention. So that's what I would say about that.
Thanks. And thanks for submitting that question. We don't have any other questions in the question box. Let me check our chat box. A question here. Our attendee Tina says, our 7-year-old grandson was starting to read before COVID-19. With the onset of distance learning, he has stopped attempting to read and shuts down completely when we try to engage him on why he does not want to try. It seems that the intricacies of distance learning intimidate him, and this has increased his fear of failure. However, he stops talking when the subject turns to reading. How do we get him to engage again?
This is a really good example, and I'm sorry that your grandson is going through this. And I think that the issue with distance learning is it's so hard for some kids. Some kids just are fine. I don't think anyone really does better with distance learning, although I think there are some kids who kind of find that classroom stressful and noisy and they might like distance learning, but I think a lot of kids really struggle with it. And this is a really good example of a young boy who really finds reading hard, right? It sounds like that maybe it's not the reading that's hard, even it's just the learning to read through distance learning. So he may not even have any problems reading. It's just that he can't learn in this way. And so the thing about so presumably I think what happens, and I can explain it as a psychologist, is when something worries us, when we get anxious about something, so let's take reading or the learning to read process or the online school in this case, the best way for us to be less anxious is, like, the way that makes us feel the best is when we avoid the situation, right? You get scared of taking the elevator, so you avoid taking the elevator. And when you avoid taking the elevator, whew, you feel a great sense of relief. And that relief is actually reinforcing. So the next time you're asked to take an elevator, it's even more scary. And I think that's what's happening with your grandson, is that he's learned that if he avoids reading, it feels much better to him, because reading is anxiety provoking, or the process of learning is anxiety provoking. And so he's avoiding more and more, to the extent he doesn't even want to talk about it with you. It's a really tricky issue when you have a kid who's really avoidant, and even harder when you're not able to bring them back to the situation. So I think one of the hardest things is going back to school for a child for whom school is actually scary, because what distance learning is doing is it's kind of postponing the inevitable, and it's going to be even harder, I think, when you have to go to school. And so what we do is, when we treat anxiety, whatever type of anxiety it is we use the same process, which is what we call, probably in simplest terms, is small steps to success, which is do something really small, do things a bit at a time. So instead of saying, why can't you read, or show me your book, or maybe it would be possible to start with, this sort of, who are the friends in your classroom, in your virtual classroom? Or if he's lucky enough to have a grandparent who's able to be with him doing the distance learning, you get to see it, and you can just do a little bit at a time, just a tiny bit. And so what happens is, if you can provide tiny chunks, they're not too overwhelming for a child, little bits of anxiety. And then what's really important is to reward the child for everything that they do, which feels scary, right? Wow, you just read a whole line of words. That is amazing. High five. Okay. And tomorrow we'll do the same thing. And then, but just to really make sure that children are reinforced for making these, what to us seem like small steps, but what to a child might seem like a really big step.
Great, thank you. Another question: how do you deal with culture or generational difference between parent and grandparents when it comes to parenting, such as how to handle emotions or other things?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing. Okay, I have a couple of fun examples of conversations like that in the book. I have one of my favorite ones is an example of a child who has a transgender friend, and the grandparents feel quite differently from the parents, and sort of the mom's stuck in the middle between the grandparents and the grandchild. But there are generational differences in everything, expression of emotions, all kinds of parenting. And I don't believe there's a parent around who hasn't had to navigate those differences. And, parents are their kids' best teachers, and grandparents have to tread really carefully, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes parents don't tread carefully. And so, I think one of the things about emotion coaching is I apply it to conversations between parents and children, but I think it's relevant to all kinds of conversations we have, just being aware of our own, what gets us going, and trying to deal with that before we engage in conversations with others, and just sort of, being open to that. So it's hard.
Great, we have two more questions. So the first one, what are a few tips about how to emotion coach when my child becomes silent and or goes into her room upset? And they specify this is maybe a preteen age child.
Yeah, well, or teens do the same thing. I mean, I think there are lots of kids who they don't want to, first of all, I don't want you looking into my eyes and boring into my soul, and don't give me that look, So I have 4 kids myself. And so, yes, I've been through adolescence. I'm going through adolescence for the 4th time, 4th with a child. Yeah, I think that can be hard for parents because they feel like they're being shut out. And I think again, if you can deal with your own stuff, like I think sometimes I speak as a parent as well. And by the way, in the book, I have these, what I call red light scenarios and green light scenarios. So every conversation, green light conversation, is preceded by a red light conversation, which is, and people would say to me, where did you get those conversations from? And well, I've done plenty of red light things where, where I've reacted rather than responded. And I think it's very easy to do that with a child who goes into a room and slams the door because you feel, like, I can't help you if you slam the door on me, or like, that is so disrespectful, or you knew that I was in the middle of a really important meeting and you just slammed the door. But again, if you can take the minute or half a minute or 10 seconds to take a deep breath and put yourself maybe in the child's shoes, or just think about, oof, something bad happened, and even give your child space. And then I think some ways to address it when you have children who really are private are to like model it around the kitchen table, right? So when you're having a meal together, to maybe just turn to your spouse. And again, I have this, I talk about this in the book, and say, I was so anxious today. I had to give this presentation on Zoom. The internet was acting up, and I just felt like trembling. And essentially what you're doing is you're modeling the healthy expression of emotions for your child. And so I think when you get more comfortable, kids get less uncomfortable about sharing their own emotions.
Great. Our next question. Our 7-year-old needs more hands-on attention for distance learning, lack of peer interaction, and just overall fears. My energy is sapped by the end of every day, and I feel like we're neglecting the 15-year-old because he's older, more independent, has the mode of a cell phone to stay in touch with friends. So how do we re-engage these types of conversations with our teenager to gauge where he is truly at?
So the question's about the teenager because the 7-year-old takes so much space. I think it's really hard. I mean, totally. And it's really tough on teenagers for so many reasons. So it sounds like in this example that in this case, your teen is a really competent teen who's like getting along with things, doing stuff on the phone, but you feel like he or she is really losing your attention because of your 7-year-old. And so maybe there's a way to do something special with a 15-year-old. And I know, like on the weekend or something, in recognition of how much help they've been by default, by enabling you to provide the scaffolding your 7-year-old needs. And it can be something as benign as staying up late to watch a movie together, or going to the outdoor market, or whatever makes you feel comfortable. Or I think there are big issues that we really haven't gotten to about teens, that I think it's really hard for teens because peers mean so much to them, their friends mean so much to them, and because there are so many limits on gathering. And I know that, we all know that teens take risks, right? They drink and drive. And I think in the COVID era, what we're seeing are teens taking risks by mixing with a lot of people. My daughter has a friend who, she and her friends have decided that, that they're, I won't say one friend, but they've sort of had a discussion about like, who's a safe person to get with and who's not such a safe person, because they know that there's a lot of partying going on over there. So I think that recognizing and rewarding your child's trustworthiness in terms of, not just that they're getting, that they're leaving you alone because they're able to get on with their homework on their own and they're on their phone, but also like really taking time to recognize and reward that trustworthiness, I think is great. Yeah. And I, my thoughts are with you. It's so hard to be home basically teacher, worker, parent, all at the same time.
Thanks. One more question has come in. So my 3.5-year-old sleeps in his room. However, every night he wakes up, leaves his room, and comes to sleep with us, his parents. When I ask him in the morning, he says he's afraid of the dark. We installed a dim light in his room, which I wasn't happy with, but he continued to say that he's scared. How do I deal with this fear emotion?
Yeah, that's a classic, isn't it? And So I don't know whether this is a new thing from COVID, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is. I think there are a lot of, sometimes when I have longer amount of time, I ask people, you know, how many of you have kids who are more scared than they were before? And most people say, yeah. So I think it's not, you know, it all, whenever scary things happen, you know, I say that the world comes into a child's life through the bubble of their family. And this is a really, really hard time. So I'm not surprised if it is something new, if it is, you know, something recent. And it's really hard because personally, I remember when my 3.5-year-old was scared of the dark, and it's hard to sleep. And then everyone's grouchy in the day because no one gets a good night's sleep. Or then you play musical beds and things like that. I think it's the same kind of approach as we were talking about before, which is small steps and lots of reinforcement. So you want to give him attention for the things that he can do, like, so you want to sort of listen to the worries and what they are, and brainstorm with him the kinds of things that would be helpful. And he might say sleeping in your bed, which I'm sure every child does, and that can be something that's like an off the table. Okay, if we wait till the end of the brainstorm to say that, but make sure you come up with other things. So you can't sleep in my bed, but what I can do is I can snuggle with you for 10 minutes. And maybe you set up a sort of a system whereby, you know, the first night, and it can be maybe even an extra like 10 minutes a night or a half an hour a week where he stays in bed, and he gets rewarded for staying in bed longer and longer. So what you're doing is you're reinforcing him for his what we could call approach behaviors, for his engaging in the thing that makes him scared. You're aware that it's hard to do something that you're scared of. It's scary, but hopefully the reward of your pride in him and your tangible reward and his pride in himself will be strong enough to overcome his fear. Yeah.
Great. I don't see any more questions, and we're just a minute away from 1 o'clock. So wanted to say thank you again so much to you, Abby, for joining us and sharing with us. Thanks to all of our attendees for joining our presentation today. And feel free to email us at HUP. I'll share those links from Abby and the video recording of our session today. Let us know of any other questions, and that's it for today. So thanks.
Okay, and I'm really grateful to everyone for coming, and I'm sorry I couldn't see you. That's the only downside of this module. And someone said, can you get the book on Amazon? Yes, you can. And I really wish you all a good day, and all of us health and, you know, just health and wellness.
Indeed. Thanks so much. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.